So let's call the meeting of the Bishop's Forest Condominium Trust annual meeting to order at 6:02 p.m. Thank you all for coming. We have a full meeting tonight with a guest presenter who's going to discuss the reserve study results with us. I want to thank those who voted. We have achieved our quorum. We have a 59.5% quorum. And for those who may be attending for the first time, I'd like to introduce the members of the board. Mark Newton is the treasurer, the vice chair, I'm sorry. Roy Landon is the treasurer. I'm Joan Ruver. I'm the chair of the board. Bob Farrell is a member of the board, as is Glenn Wolfsit and Bonnie Riegelman, who will be stepping off the board after tonight's meeting. And Joe Stewart is also a member of the board. I think that covers everyone. And I want to thank those who have been so actively involved on the board this past year. I also want to introduce Alyssa Lennon. For those of you who may not have yet met her personally, she is the Bishop's Forest manager and works very hard on all of our behalfs.
Hello, thank you, Joan.
Okay, Roy. I'm just briefly going to review the agenda tonight. After some preliminary remarks from me, we're going to have the presentation from Thor. I'm looking for your last name.
Bernanke.
Bernanke, thank you.
There you go.
From our consultation group. And then we will hear a very detailed, lengthy presentation from Roy, the treasurer, on the financials. And you will hear from Bob Farrell on the construction committee and Joe Stewart on the landscape committee. We'll take questions after Thor's presentation, so please hold any questions that you have until he's completed his whole presentation. After that, we'll take a general question and answers from everyone after Roy's presentation and after all of the committees have completed their presentations. Alyssa will conclude the meeting with the results of the election. I'd like to just take a few minutes to review the Bishop's Forest mission statement. Bishop's Forest is a condominium community dedicated to a safe and enjoyable, welcoming community for people of all ages and backgrounds. Our homes and infrastructure will be maintained for sustainable use and attractiveness. Our building, grounds, and amenities will strive to be safe places to live and use. Amenities including landscaping, open spaces, pool, and tennis courts are for the enjoyment of all. We will encourage community through clubs, social events, shared interests, and volunteer opportunities. We value the quiet enjoyment of homes as well as participation of all residents. In review, briefly because you'll hear more about this from various committees. In 25 and 26, we continue to focus on siding, painting, and rear deck refurbishment. The front porches replacement project was completed in 2025, and I'm sure, or I hope most of you have seen the beautiful new paving project at the pool, which really looks fabulous. That was started in 2025 and completed in 2026. We have selected a new landscape and snow removal company, and we hope to work closely with them and develop a true partnership. We have also installed berms to deal with erosion issues throughout the community. And yes, we're aware that there are several problems with some of the berms that were put in place. Communications, we began republishing the newsletter in 2025. And now that Bonnie's leaving the board and needs to relinquish that responsibility, we're looking at other alternatives. Our goals for 26 and 27 include completing the reserve study and sharing the results with the community, which we're doing tonight. Continuing to deliver on major projects and work with the new landscape company to hopefully find some solutions to the erosion of grass and improve the appearance of the landscaping.
Okay,
Now
so I'll just jump in here. Go ahead.
Okay.
I'll jump in here. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining Bishop's Forest annual meeting. So my name is Roy Landon, and I'm the treasurer. Before I begin my financial presentation, I'll be introducing Thor Bernacki from Advanced Reserve Solution, who will be presenting highlights from the recently updated Bishop's Forest Reserve Study. For owners who don't recall or are new to the community, ARS prepared the reserve study conducted in 2022. The board re-engaged them in 2025 to update the 2022 reserve study. What this update required was a physical visit to Bishop's Forest in October of 2025 to update the component inventory for the community and to review current conditions of those components. Bishop's Forest supplied historic costs for expenditures from 2023 through 2025, as well as any quotes that we had procured for work planned in 2026, such as the paving of Bishop's Forest Drive. ARS took all these pieces and updated their model. A copy of the final ARS reserve plan will be available to unit owners on our website after the meeting. And as Joan had mentioned, we just ask people to hold their questions related to the reserve study until after the presentation. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Thor will begin sharing his screen for the presentation. So over to you, Thor.
Thank you, Roy. Appreciate that. So I'm going to start sharing. And then just let me know if you are able to see my screen.
There we go.
Okay, we're good?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So good evening, everyone. And first of all, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. As Roy said, my name is Thor Bernacki. I'm a reserve analyst and business partner with Advanced Reserve Solutions. Tonight, the primary objective is going to be to walk you through the Bishop Forest Reserve Study. But before we do that, and especially for those that are not familiar with reserve studies, I think it is equally important to spend a little time explaining what a reserve study is, why it's important, and how it serves as a long-term financial planning tool for the association. So to get started, the Bishop Forest Reserve Study, it consists of approximately 249 pages of analysis. As Roy said, will be available at the end of the presentation. And it includes 163 individual reserve components. Those components represent the major common area assets that the association is responsible for maintaining, repairing, and then eventually replacing. So the purpose of a report is not simply to identify components that may need replacement in the future, but rather it is to develop really a long-term financial roadmap that allows the association to, one, anticipate future expenses, and two, fund those obligations in a systematic and equitable manner. We'll begin first by discussing what a reserve study is and what it's designed to accomplish, why reserve studies are important for condominium associations, what information a reserve study provides to boards and homeowners alike, and finally, how studies function as a practical planning tool for managing future capital expenditures and reserve funding. By the end of the presentation, my goal is for everyone to have a better understanding on how reserve planning supports the long-term physical and also financial health of the community. So what is a reserve study? Well, reserve study is fundamentally a long-term capital planning tool. In essence, it helps the association identify the major common area components it's responsible for maintaining and replacing. It's an estimate when those expenditures may occur, and it develops a funding strategy to prepare for those expenses. The study serves several purposes. First, it creates an inventory of the association's major reserve components. Second, it projects future repair and replacement costs over a long planning horizon. And third, it provides a financial roadmap that helps the board make informed funding decisions today while preparing for future obligations. Now, at the same time, it's important to understand what a reserve study is not. So it's not a guarantee of future costs. Construction costs, inflation, labor rates, market conditions, they can all change over time. It's not a step-by-step repair manual. The study will identify major capital projects, but it will not provide engineering specifications or construction documents. It's not a prediction of the exact year that a component will fail. Components rarely follow a precise schedule. They may be close to what we have indicated, but some will last longer than expected, while others may require replacement sooner. And finally, it's not a substitute for routine inspections and maintenance. In fact, and we recommend this, good maintenance often extends component life, and it also improves the association's overall reserve position. The goal of a reserve study is not perfect prediction. I don't want anyone to think that. The goal is to reduce uncertainty, and that's exactly what a reserve study is for, to anticipate future expenses and minimize the likelihood of unexpected financial surprises, which nobody wants. So now that we've discussed what a reserve study is, and just as importantly, what it's not, the next question is really, why does reserve planning matter in the first place? So the answer is fairly simple. Every community faces the same reality. Buildings age, materials deteriorate, and costs continue to change over time. Roofs are going to wear out, pavement deteriorates. You've already experienced that. Siding, decks, mechanical equipment, drainage systems, they all have finite service lives. And none of these expenditures are unexpected. We're all accustomed to them. They're simply part of owning and maintaining a community over the long haul, just as someone owns an individual house. So that leads to what I believe is the most important statement or question on this slide. And that question is not if major repairs will occur. The question is whether the association will be financially prepared when they do. Most important question. And here's what we know. We know major components follow predictable life cycles that can be planned for. Yes, we may not be spot on, but they will be close. So you've already prepared for it. Long-term planning helps avoid special assessments and financial surprises, which again, nobody wants. Adequate reserves support property values. Nobody wants their property value to go down. You want it to increase. Buyer confidence and lender requirements. So if the maintenance is deferred, a lot of times people won't want to buy into an association that has deferred maintenance. And there's also lender requirements. Those associations that do not maintain their associations can become blacklisted. Reserve planning also helps the board meet its fiduciary responsibility to the community. So that's very important. With not maintaining the association can lead into legal issues for board members. So we've talked about why reserve studies matter, why planning ahead is important. The next logical question then is, what are the actual benefits of having adequate reserves? So one of the primary benefits of adequate reserves is the ability to maintain stable and predictable assessments. So rather than experience sudden increases in dues or large special assessments, which does happen frequently with associations, when major projects arise, the association in essence can plan ahead and fund those obligations gradually over time. They also ensure the cost of long-term repairs is shared fairly across owners over time. This is very important. Without reserves, future owners can end up paying for deterioration that occurred over many years before they actually arrived and purchased the property, which is both unfair and then, of course, will defer future home buyers from purchasing and thereby reducing market share and value. So with adequate reserves, capital projects can be completed in a timely manner when needed rather than delayed. And delaying projects, which in many associations are forced to do that, often results in higher costs in the long run and additional deterioration. So ultimately, the goal is a sustainable financial structure. And finally, adequate reserves help minimize financial shock to homeowners. So to simply sum it up, reserve funding is about sharing costs fairly, maintaining the community's assets responsibly, and avoiding financial surprises whenever possible. So far we've discussed what reserve studies are, why they matter, and the benefits of adequate reserve funding. The next logical step then to discuss is understanding how a reserve study actually works as a planning tool and what information is provided to help boards make informed decisions. So reserve studies follow three basic steps. Step one, identify the components. This means identifying the physical assets the association is responsible for maintaining. Examples are roofs, siding, roads, parking areas, infrastructure, community facilities such as the pool, hot tub, and so forth. Step two, estimate life and timing. Each component has an expected useful life. When we estimate when repairs or replacements will likely occur. Step three, plan funding. Once we know what we need replacement and when, we develop a plan to fund those costs gradually over time. So the goal is simple. Understand what the association owns, estimate when it will require replacement, and fund those costs gradually rather than all at once through a special assessment. So we discussed why reserve funding is important and the benefits it provides. The next question is, what exactly are we funding for? Not all reserve components have the same financial impact. In most communities, really a relatively small number of major assets account for a large portion of the future reserve expenditures. So while the reserve study indicates 163 individual components within the study, the majority of the future expenditures are concentrated into a few major asset categories. The first is exterior siding. This includes periodic painting, repairs, and eventual replacement of the materials that age and deteriorate. Given the extent of the siding throughout the community, this represents one of the largest long-term reserve obligations. Another significant cost driver is the roofing system. Although roofs have relatively long service lives, replacement costs are substantial when work is eventually required. And then we have the asphalt pavement. These assets require ongoing maintenance, periodic repairs, and eventual resurfacing or possible reconstruction. Because of the large square footage involved, those projects can represent a significant future expenditures. And then finally, we have decks and balconies. They're an important reserve component. These structures are exposed to the elements year-round and require periodic repairs and replacement to maintain functionality and, most importantly, safety. So now there are many additional components included in this reserve study. These categories, however, represent some of the most significant long-term funding obligations and therefore will have a major influence on the association's major reserve funding needs. So let's next take a closer look at one of the most significant reserve components in the community, the wood siding system. So phase one, under the current reserve plan, approximately 20% of the siding inventory is scheduled for replacement between 2026 and 2031, representing an estimated expenditure of approximately $2.2 million. We also, under the suspended bullet, found that due to the extensive siding replacement that has already been done up through that time frame, the replacement schedule will be suspended from 2032 through 2043 and instead be replaced with targeted repairs and selective replacement of deteriorated areas. These repairs are estimated at approximately 15% of the phase one replacement costs. This approach generates an estimated savings for the association of nearly $6 million when compared to continuing large-scale replacement cycles during that period. We will see why that's an important savings in another slide. Phase two, beginning in 2044, the reserve plan resumes a structured replacement program on a rotational basis, replacing approximately 20% of the siding inventory during each cycle moving forward. Next is painting. The study assumes that full repainting will continue every 6 years on a village-by-village rotation. Oops, sorry about that. All right, so this ongoing maintenance program will help preserve the wood siding, protect it from environmental exposure, and reduce the likelihood of premature deterioration. It's important to note that consistent maintenance can significantly extend the useful life of siding systems and defer major capital expenditures. So maintaining this exterior painting cycle is very important. So the next major cost drivers are the roofing system and the roadway network. So the study assumes approximate 25-year replacement cycle for the asphalt shingle roofs, which is consistent with industry expectations for similar installation and under normal maintenance condition. Based on the age distribution of the roofs throughout the community, the study projects 2 major replacement cycles. The 30-year planning period, and the first cycle is going to be 2029 through 2035 with a budget of a little over $2 million, and then 2043 through 2049 with a budget of about $3.6 million. Now, for the roads, the other major infrastructure assets is the asphalt roadway system. Roadways generally follow a 20 to 25-year replacement cycle, although there are many factors that really influence longevity, so that may vary slightly. And those factors include the amount of traffic, the weather exposure, drainage conditions, and maintenance practices. Paving are scheduled to commence in the years this year, 2026, 2037, 2040, and also 2043. Total budget is a little over 2.5 million. So you can see that together, roofing roadway projects, they represent some of the largest capital expenditures facing the association over the next several decades. Now, remember, the purpose of the reserve study is to help ensure funds are being accumulated before these obligations arise, rather than after in the form of special assessment. So the next final major capital category that we're going to talk about, we'll review, is the decks and balconies. Like siding, roofs, roadways, these components also have a finite service lives, and require planning to ensure the funding is available when replacement comes necessary. So starting with the decks, the study assumes an approximate 25-year replacement cycle based on their construction, exposure, and expected performance. To better distribute costs over time, deck replacements are phased. So we have phase 1, years 2026 through 2031. 10% of the total amount of decks are budgeted at a little over 500,000. Phase 2 is a little more substantial, between 2032 to 2038. 90% of the total decks, we're estimating a budget of about 4.7 million to make those replacements. Now, the study also includes a replacement of 58 balconies. So we have 5 phases between 2031 and 2035, where 20% are replaced in each given year. There are a total of 58 balconies, and the budget for that is about 464,000. Now, in addition to full replacement project, the reserve study also includes a one-time deck and balcony repair program, and that's going to commence between 2026 and 2031. These repairs are intended to address localized deterioration and extend the service lives of the existing structures where appropriate. That cost there, we're budgeted at around 154,000. Now, an important observation to note that the projected savings generated by the siding replacement suspension exceeds the total projected cost of the deck and balcony program. So we can see, as seen in the slide before, it was close to $6 million in savings. Total costs of deck and balconies are coming in at about 5.8 million. So by suspending the siding replacement, the savings paid for the decks and balcony replacement, basically. So now we've reviewed the association's major capital assets and the projects that are expected over the coming decades. The next step I'd like to take a look at is how those individual projects combine to create the association's overall reserve spending needs. This chart brings all 163 reserve components together into a single annual expenditure forecast, and can also be found in a report once you get to take a look at it. So we have, as bullets, it displays projected capital spending by year, reflects inflation and component life cycles. The expenditures occur in cycles. You can see it's not evenly. And peak years drive reserve funding requirements. The key takeaway here really is that reserve funding must be designed to accommodate both the average years, but also the peak spending years. Those larger expenditure years are really what drive the reserve funding requirements, because the association needs to have sufficient funds available when major projects arise. So this is one of the primary reasons reserve planning is so important. Without the advanced funding, as you can tell by the graph here, the association could face substantial financial pressure when several large projects occur within a relatively short period of time. So now that we've seen the expenditure chart that shows us what the association is expected to spend over time, the next question is, how were those projections developed? But before reviewing the funding outlook, I think one other point that we need to bring out is to understand the assumptions that drive the reserve model. So every reserve study relies on a set of economic and financial assumptions. These assumptions are summarized in the executive summary, also found in the report, and form the foundation of the funding projections throughout the report, throughout the entire 30 years. So we have inflation rate set at 3%, represents long-term construction cost growth. And underneath the inflation rate, there's also annual contribution increase, 3%. That keeps pace with inflation. We also have investment rate, 3%. That represents the expected earnings on the reserve balances. And then there's also taxes on investments. So the IRS will tax 30% on those gains. And then there's also a contingency of 3% that provides really a buffer for uncertainty in cost projections. So together, these assumptions create a realistic, really a framework for projecting the future expenditures and evaluating the association's funding needs. Without them, the projections would be flawed. It's important that those are reflected. Now, that being said, it's also important to remember that the reserve studies, they're not static documents. As actual inflation, construction costs, reserve balances change over time, future updates to this study will be needed to adjust those assumptions accordingly. We recommend doing updates anywhere between 3 and 5 years. So now that we've reviewed the assumption used in the funding model, let's take a look at where the association stands today from a reserve funding perspective. One of the most commonly used metrics that you'll find in reserve studies is in the industry, I should say, is called the percent funded. So percent funded compares the association's anticipated reserve balance to the amount that would ideally be accumulated based on the component's age and the condition of each reserve component. So if all the reserve components were contributing proportionately toward their eventual replacement costs, the association, as you can see in the slide here, would have approximately 10.1 million accumulated in reserves today. As of January 26th, the association, or January 1st, 2026, the association anticipated reserve balance was approximately 2.6 million. Now, when those figures are compared, the result is a percent funded level of approximately 25%. It's important to note and to understand what this number does and does not mean, however. A 25% funding level does not mean the association is in immediate financial trouble. We've seen much worse, and it does not mean that project cannot be completed, but rather indicates that the association has accumulated about 1/4 of the reserve funds that would ideally be available based on how all the components are aging. So within the reserve study, funding levels above approximately 70% are generally considered strong, while lower funding levels are associated with the possibility of increased reliance on future contribution increases or special assessments to meet future obligations. It'll be up to the association to decide as to where they want to be as far as funding goes, how strongly they want to be funded. So to understand this number more clearly, though, as far as the percent funded, let's take a look at what the fully funded balance actually represents. So what is a fully funded balance? The fully funded balance represents the accumulated depreciation of all reserve components. It reflects how much money would be set aside today if funding had occurred proportionately as each component aged. And it's used as a benchmark to measure reserve strength. But it does not mean association must actually hold that full amount in cash. All right, that's important to know. You shouldn't automatically think that we need to have 10 million in the account right now. That is not the case. So just to further elaborate, think about a roof with a 25-year life expectancy. If that roof is 10 years old, approximately 40% of its useful life has become basically has been consumed. Same thing, if a roadway is halfway through its expected life, approximately half of its eventual replacement cost obligation has already occurred, and you should have that sitting in your account if possible. The reserve study really performs this calculation for every reserve component in the community and combines those values into a single number, and that's what we call a fully funded balance. So for Bishop's Forest, the amount is approximately 10.1 million. And this can actually be viewed within the Bishop's Forest report. Each reserve component has a current replacement cost, an expected useful life, and a remaining life. So using those values, the reserve study determines how much of each component's cost has effectively been consumed through aging and deterioration, referred as, again, the fully funded balance. And the study really performs this calculation for all of the 163 reserve components, and then again combines the results to arrive at the association's fully funded balance that we see as the 25.727%. The association actual reserve balance is then compared against the total to determine its percent funded level, again at 27.27. So bottom line, the fully funded balance is not a guess. I think that's the biggest thing that we're trying to bring out. It's calculated by evaluating every reserve component individually. Again, 163 reserve components within the report. So we've now discussed what the fully funded balance represents, how percent funded is calculated, and also what it tells us about reserve fund strength. The next question, what does the reserve study conclude about Bishop's Forest's financial position? To answer that question, the reserve study develops a 30-year funding model based on projected capital expenditures, current reserve balances, and future reserve contributions. The analysis assumes an opening reserve balance of approximately 2.56 million and current annual reserve contribution of approximately 954,000. The model also assumes a 3% annual increase in both construction cost inflation and reserve contributions. Using these assumptions, the study evaluates the association's ability to meet future capital obligations while maintaining an adequate reserve balance. So the next slide brings all of these assumptions together and summarizes the association's current financial outlook, assuming the association maintains a 3% annual inflation rate and a 3% annual member contribution increase. Remember, these numbers can change a little bit, and I think Roy may talk a little bit about that later as well. So under the current reserve balance, we see we have the 2.5 million. We have member contribution. We have the projected capital expenditures and the funding assumptions we discussed earlier. The study projects how the reserve fund is expected to perform over time at a 3% inflation rate and member contribution rate. In the study, when you take a look at it, it will go out a full 30 years. So one of the key observations is that under the current funding plan, the association generally remains in the weak to moderate funding range, which is better than most. And we can see that through approximately 2039. positive takeaways that really the reserve fund remains positive throughout the projection period. So you're definitely commended for that. And it continues to meet anticipated expenditures, meaning that the balances in the reserve account do not go to zero. So the funding analysis also indicates that the association does remain, however, below what the reserve industry would typically consider as a strong funded position. So as a result, the board may wish to evaluate whether additional contribution increases beyond inflation should be considered, or higher member contribution if the goal is to improve reserve strength and also reduce long-term funding risk. So we see that under this funding plan, the association remains in a weak to moderate funding range through much of the projected period. So what are the alternatives? Reserve studies are designed really to evaluate different funding strategies and the trade-offs associated with each approach. The next slide is really going to summarize 3 funding options, each representing a different balance between reserve contributions, reserve strength, and long-term financial risk. In addition to the reserve, before I bring up the slide, in addition to the reserve study report, Advanced Reserve Solutions also provided a funding alternatives letter to the board that included multiple 30-year funding scenarios. So what we did include is the current 3% inflation strategy, and it would constitute a minimum funding requirement, and that would land in 30 years. It would land the association at 37% funded. So it's going to be a higher long-term risk for the association to maintain that. We did also include a middle intermediate strategy that would bring the association up to 70% funded over 30 years. It's a moderate increase and improved financial security. And then we always recommend in our studies the 100% funded, not always feasible within 30 years, but that's a fully funded reserve plan, lowest long-term funding risk. So we can see that all these options range from maintaining the current inflationary funding strategy to achieving a fully funded reserve position over time. Advanced Reserve Solutions generally recommends funding plans that move the association toward the fully funded reserve position, as this provides the greatest long-term financial stability and the lowest funding risk. However, that being said, we also recognize that every community has unique financial considerations, and achieving a fully funded position may not always be immediately practical or even desirable. So for that reason, the study presents multiple funding alternatives for the board's consideration. Now, due to time constraints, because I know we have so much more to talk about, this evening we'll focus on a recommended strategy and review what a path towards 100% funding over the next 30 years would look like for Bishop's Forest. So let's take a closer look at what that recommended funding strategy would look like for Bishop's Forest. So under the recommended funding plan, annual reserve contributions would increase to approximately $1.19 million in fiscal year 2026. Thereafter, contributions would continue to increase at 3% annually, consistent with inflation assumption used throughout the study. On an average unit basis, this equates to approximately $368 per month in reserve contributions during the first year, which is approximately $72 per month higher than the current funding plan. The purpose of this increase is really to strengthen the reserve fund over time and better align contributions with the association's long-term capital obligations. Under this strategy, the association is projected to achieve a fully funded reserve position within the 30-year planning period, while maintaining a stable reserve balance throughout the projection. In short, this study requires a higher contribution today but it substantially reduces long-term funding risks and places association in a stronger financial position for future generations of owners. The next slide is going to illustrate the expected performance of the recommended funding plan over the next 30 years. Under this funding strategy, reserve contributions increase gradually over time while maintaining positive reserve balances throughout the projected period. As the reserve fund grows, the association percent funding level steadily improves from its current position. You'll notice that the funding level progresses through the moderate range into the strong range and ultimately reaches 100% fully funded position near the end of the 30-year projection period. And this is important because it really demonstrates that the association can gradually strengthen its reserve position over time, really without relying on large one-time funding events or special assessments. So in summary, the recommended plan is designed to balance today's funding needs with tomorrow's capital obligations. It creates a more sustainable and financially stable reserve program for the community. So what is next for Bishop's Forest? Ultimately, that decision belongs to the board and the members. The reserve study does not tell the association what it must do. Rather, it really provides the information necessary to understand future capital obligations, evaluate the funding options, and really make informed decisions regarding reserve contributions and long-term financial planning. So basically, a reserve funding plan should reflect the community's desired level of financial risk. I'll say that again, desired level of financial risk. You don't necessarily need to go to 100% over 30 years, although we do recommend that if it's possible. We've seen current funding levels are weak to moderate in supporting long-term capital needs. So that being said, the association now really has a long-term roadmap for understanding its future capital needs and really evaluating the financial implications of different funding decisions. So with this reserve study report, we feel now that the board can make an informed funding decision. So, all right, well, that basically concludes the overview of Bishop's Forest study. Just again, the goal of the study is to support the long-term financial sustainable capital funding for the community. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
So at this point, people should either raise their virtual hand to ask a question or submit a chat question
To the host.
to the host. Yes.
Looks like,
Is Steve Lewis? Do you see him?
yep, Steve Lewis. I think you're muted.
Yeah. There should be something popping up on the screen asking you to unmute, Steve. Sometimes it doesn't work right away.
Okay,
There you go.
There you go.
yeah, sorry about that. Well, first, thanks so much. This was extremely detailed and informative. I really appreciate it. So to get fully funded to the 100%, if that's what the community wants to do, are you suggesting that to get up to that a certain level, I think you said to get like another $72 average per unit. So the first year would be to a certain percent increase to get to a certain level, and then all the other years 3% increase, or no?
Yes.
Yeah, so every year right now, based on inflation, it's going to increase 3% on an annual basis, and that just to keep pace with inflation. Otherwise, if you fall behind inflation, you're going to find that the costs increase and you're not keeping up with those costs to be able to maintain or head towards a fully funded in 30 years.
So I know this, so on average, so if it was recommended for this coming year, what would be the percent increase and I tremendously appreciate the thought process behind this of what is, I don't know, best practice. I really appreciate that. So what would be the approximate on average percent increase recommended to get to that level in the first year? Because after that, it would be 3% a year, or no?
It's going to be 3% every single year, but it's going to start out with an annual reserve contribution. And I brought it up on the screen of the 1.187 million on an annual basis compared to what's being collected now.
No, I see that. I guess my question is approximately on average, what would the percent increase? I think that's what people would want to know. What would be the percent increase suggested in their monthly condo fee in year one?
Let's see, I'd have to do that calculation. So, Roy, how much is, because I don't have the screen up on me, how much
Right,
are being collected on an annual basis right now? It was 900.
Right, so it's 953. So it's roughly a 25% increase to go from the current contribution level for the entire year up to a million 187.
Okay.
So it'd be
So on
25%.
average, it would be about a 25% increase in the condo fee for year one, and then after that, 3%?
Yeah, but the 25% doesn't translate simply because our condo fee includes not only the reserve contribution, but it also includes operating expenses. So it represents about 34% of every dollar that's contributed. So it would be something like it would be I would have to sit down and actually calculate that.
No, I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot.
Yeah.
So I guess one option let's say it's 8% for year one, and then every year after 3%. That's one option. And another option might be make it a little more gradual. Maybe the next number of years, 5% each year to get to the same place. It just says to present options to the community. It's just something to think about.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
And remember, this study is just a roadmap. It's not an end all, and so there's thousands of different ways to, just like you mentioned, by percentage increases, and where do you start at the beginning bounds and so forth to create a plan that works for the entire community.
In subsequent years.
I think I'll just mention, I don't want to take up all this. I think that somehow, to present that there's like to get to 70% versus 100%, that'll need to be explained, and then some different options how we get there. Is it 8% and then 3% after that, or is it 5% each year to get to the same place?
Right. So Steve, in my presentation, I have just the work that we've done to date, and we have a proposed recommendation. So if you just wait a little bit, we can talk about that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize.
That's
and
okay.
Then I guess the only other question I have is, this assumes a 3% inflation rate and a 3% contingency rate. And is that a reasonable estimate based on recent history as far as what wood and other things cost, and generally what has occurred as far as previous estimates versus actual expenditures? I just don't know if 3% inflation rate for these types of capital costs and contingencies reflects recent history. I just don't know.
It does reflect current conditions. I will say, though, with the war in Iran, we are seeing an uptick in obviously in the cost of oil, which leads into transportation, paving, and all that. So there will be an uptick in that. However, once that war is done, we do expect that to come back down. So we remember the study has to go out 30 years. But at the same time, mentioned earlier that we do recommend an update every 3 to 5 years. And based on inflationary numbers and how they were trending, there would be an adjustment to the inflation rate at that point in time to analyze how the association is doing and project that out 30 years based on those assumptions.
Well, thanks so much. Those are my key questions. I really want to commend the board and the consultant as far as all this detailed work. It's very informative, very well thought out. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Stanley, you had your hand raised. You can go ahead.
Yeah, this is Joanne. I've got a vague recollection from last time that we were presented with the option of if we wanted to go to 100% and maybe 30 or 50%, what the monthly difference would be. Have you included that? That's the first part. And how did you look at how did we do based on what we had planned to do as a result of the last reserve study? Are we doing better or worse than what we were aiming at? I'm not
So-
sure that's the way to say it, but
Right. So Joanne, those are good questions. I would just wait until my presentation because I go
Okay.
through a couple of different scenarios.
okay.
Yep.
And also, I'll just throw in that we did provide a funding alternatives letter that discusses some of the alternatives as well, that Roy may show.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a couple in chat. Somebody says, is the risk associated with underfunding that everything breaks at the same time and needs immediate repair?
Ask that question again. I think I.
Is the risk associated with underfunding that everything breaks at the same time and needs immediate repair?
So I think I understand the question. Are you saying that are you at risk right now of that happening? Is that what the question is?
I think it's asking what's the risk of being
over time.
underfunded.
Yeah, I mean, right
Right.
now you're in the weak to moderate. You have enough funds to be able to be available to replace the components when they become due. So if I understand the question correctly, I don't think you're not going to run into a situation where you'll be out of funds. I'm hoping I answered that question. Roy, you can chime in if there's something.
So that's one of actually what I would say is that's one of the things that I will discuss. I have a slide associated with risks.
Okay, thank you.
I think we can move on.
I would just like to say, the risk of everything breaking at once is extremely low. I mean, the roads are not all going to become dysfunctional at the same time that all the siding becomes dysfunctional, that all at the same time all the roofs are dysfunctional. It's just not unless a bomb fell, a nuclear bomb fell on Bishop's Forest. It's not going to happen.
Right. Anything else in chat?
I don't have anything else.
And just to expand, I brought up the slide there. You can see from 2026 to 2040, your balances in the far left are clearly quite elevated, and there's no indicated of risk of not having enough funds.
Okay. Unless we have any other questions for Thor, I'd just like to thank him, Thor. It's been it's been great working with you. Alyssa, myself, and other members of the board have worked with Thor, and this is a great opportunity for us to really, I think, like he mentioned, every 3 years to 5 years, to really update our thinking 3 years ago to what has happened over that period of time, which Joanne just asked, and to look to the future. And we've made some changes in the reserve study, which I will be reviewing with people, which has allowed us to do some different things and be able to maintain a healthy balance. So anyhow, Thor, thank you for your time and for the presentation.
Yes,
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Thor.
You're welcome. Have a good evening, everybody.
You
You
too.
as well.
Will do.
I'm going to stop sharing. Did you get it back there, Roy?
I got it back.
Okay. All right. Well, good night, everybody.
Good night, Thor. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thor. Okay. Hold on. Current slide. Okay. Can people see my screen?
Now we see the reserve study.
The reserve study. Okay. Okay, here we go. So, the focus of my presentation tonight is to highlight financial accomplishments of 2025 and plans and forecasts for 2026 and beyond. Additionally, I'll be talking about the adjustments Bishop's Forest is proposing to make to the reserve funding levels based upon the 2026 reserve study that Thor just went through. So I'm also going to ask, as Joan had mentioned, to hold your questions until I have finished my presentation and the other two board members have finished their presentation, and then we'll go into a question and answer period. So operations, we had a very successful 2025, ending the fiscal year with an operating surplus of $46,000. So this surplus was driven by increased revenues, savings in landscape and snow costs, and utilities partially offset by tax expense on interest income, as Thor had mentioned. It's great to earn interest, but we pay 30% on that. So this surplus allowed Bishop's Forest to pay it forward and supplement our operating plan for 2026. So we allocated $30,000 of this surplus to reduce the 2026 maintenance fee increase. The current forecast for 2026 is a deficit for the year of approximately $45,000. So this is just given some additional changes. The deficit spending is driven primarily by a change in our gutter cleaning company, catch basin cleaning, legal expenses, and tax accruals. Of course, it's early in the year, and where we end up at the end of the year, we work to reduce any kind of deficit that we might expect at the end of the year. The 2026 forecast also includes unbudgeted spending Bishop's Forest incurred over the winter of $152,000 as a result of heavy snowfall and low temperatures, which created ice dams. And we've talked about this in several meetings, but I'm just going to review it for people who did not attend those meetings. So as we explained during the public board meeting on May 21st, Bishop's Forest snow removal contract is structured as a fixed price contract for each winter season. The contract covers snow plowing and de-icing of up to 50 inches per season. Once snowfall exceeds 50 inches, Bishop's Forest begins to pay on a per inch basis. So the accumulated snowfall for this winter season was 66.5 inches or 16.5 inches above the existing contract that we had with ND. The unbudgeted cost for this additional snowfall was $91,470. In addition, Bishop's Forest incurred costs for roof sweeping services on both units experiencing ice dam leaks and precautionary snow removal on roofs that had significant ice buildup. The total cost for these services was $60,825. So the total cost was $152,295. Since this was an unexpected expenditure for Bishop homeowners, Thayer will be sending out an invoice on August 1st of 2026, which represents a special assessment, which will be payable by the end of the month. So all owners will be receiving in the mail in the next few days a notice from the board announcing this special assessment, when to expect an invoice or statement from Thayer, as well as how to submit the payment. So we hope these extra months, so we're in June, we're not billing it until August 1st, it is to be paid by the end of the month, will help people prepare for this expenditure. So the reserve fund. So here's a look at the Bishop's Forest reserve account from 2023 to 2026. As you can see, we've made tremendous progress from the reserve deficit we started with in 2023, creating a more stable financial future for the community for building and infrastructure maintenance. In 2025, the annual contribution for the reserve fund increased by 8% to $882,000. Assessment contributions and interest income added $721,000, and spending for this was reduced by spending for the year of $1.1 million, resulting in a surplus for the year of $489,000, or an ending balance of $2.4 million. In 2026, the annual contribution to the reserve fund increased by 8% as planned to $954,000. So I keep saying as planned, and I will show you in further slides, when we did the 2022 reserve study, we had planned on increasing each year the reserve contribution by 8% out through an extended period of time. So we have been following the plan that we established at the end of 2022, moving into 2023. The 2022 assessment that was issued in 2023 ended in February of 2026, contributing $102,000 with interest income forecast for $65,000 for this year. Spending of $1.6 million is planned for this year, with a resulting deficit of $392,000 or an ending reserve balance of approximately $2 million. So just to give you a little color about how we have invested back in the community, here's a look. In 2025, we continued to focus our efforts on completing front porch replacements throughout the community, and that was completed in 2025. So the acceleration really made this project possible for early completion because we did receive assessment funds in 2023 earlier than we had anticipated. So we were able to move those projects forward. And I think Thor had mentioned you have plans, but they become sort of fluid based on where you are in any period of time. So annual siding replacement, painting, and deck refurbishment program continued in 2025, and we began the replacement of pool pavers at the end of the year. In 2026, you'll notice that spending has shifted a bit. So Bishop's Forest will be focusing more money on roads and site improvements. A major project for 2026 is the paving of Bishop's Forest Drive and Overlook. Additionally, in 2026, it's really the start of a multi-year program focused on fencing and walls throughout the community. I think people probably walking around the community have noticed that some of these walls are pretty deteriorated, and we are beginning that program, which will extend over multiple years. The annual siding replacement and painting program continues with a significant change, and I'm going to be talking about that on the next slide. And lastly, we'll be finishing up the pool project, and we have completed that. There's just a small amount that is not completed. Where we replaced the pavers as well as added granite steps and facing to the concrete walls. So one of the things that Thor alluded to in his presentation was that we made some changes regarding the siding maintenance program. We're spending in the years 2026 to 2031, $2.2 million. We are suspending that program beginning in 2032. And as a result, and I will talk a little bit more later here, we will be saving $6 million over the following 12 years. And these changes in the model made a significant change in the 2022 plan that we put together. So the savings on siding will allow Bishop's Forest to begin in 2032 a deck replacement program with an estimated cost of $4.7 million. Thor has mentioned some of these figures, but this is a very significant change, and I think a change that we spent a lot of time making sure we felt comfortable with. The program is planned to begin in 2032. This is for deck replacements, and we will be replacing all decks within the community over that period of time through 2038, and that is built into this current plan. The deck replacement will be the removal of all of the supports, the framing, the railings, and we will be putting brand new supports, framings, and railings, replacing the flooring with composite flooring that requires no painting and has a useful life of well over 35 years. In addition, the caps on the railings will also be composite. So we think this is going to be a great change for the community. So a little bit about what we were doing to what we are doing and why we did it. So the prior program that began in 2003 rotated through the villages and replaced approximately 20% of the original siding installed in the late 80s and early 90s every 6 years. I'll be referring to this siding as Gen 1 siding. The useful life of the original Gen 1 siding, which is a high-grade cedar siding, is roughly 20 to 40 years, and that depends on the maintenance of the siding over that period of years. Beginning in 2026, what we decided, and this was in conjunction with working with Prime Touch, is that we will be removing all of the Gen 1 siding from each of the villages as we rotate through. So some villages have much more siding to replace than others, but the result, after we finish cycling through all of the villages, that each village will have 100% Gen 2 siding, which is also high-grade cedar siding. This will allow Bishop's Forest to modify the program to make spot repairs, power wash, and then paint each village on the same annual rotation beginning in 2032. And this is what delivers the $6 million in savings over the following 12 years. As mentioned above, beginning in 2032, instead of dealing with the exterior replacing siding, we will be working on the decks within every community, and we will be rotating through on the same cycle that we have today. And by the end of 2038, I think we will have replaced all of the decks. So this for people who look at the reserve study, it has a lot of detail, but this is a major accomplishment for the community. If you believe that we have secured the exterior of the community with brand new, some of it's aged, some of it will be brand new siding, which has a useful life, we think, of close to 40 years because we maintain it very well, and replace decks, which is a huge component within the community. So a lot of the infrastructure for Bishop's Forest will be addressed, and I will be talking a little bit more about that in a little while in terms of risks. So Thor presented different scenarios for funding the reserve fund. So, and hold on a second. So he presented different details regarding reserve study, talked about how it's compiled, the percent funded, why it's important, and some scenarios about achieving certain funding levels at Bishop's Forest. So these are great foundational materials for the board and the community. It's a plan and validation of the cost requirements to maintain buildings and infrastructure for the community. So what's the board done with this information? We ran our own scenarios using the ARS model numbers to test various funding levels. We've approached reserve funding by beginning with the annual contribution, $953,000, which is being contributed in 2026. And that represents 34% of your maintenance fees, or every dollar of your maintenance fee, 34 cents goes into reserves. And we tested how annual increases affect the percent funded in over 30 years. We also looked at funding levels over the next 10 years to ensure that reserve balances were adequate given the set of risks. So here are the three scenarios that we looked at. Current. Thor presented some of this. He talked about current as the inflation scenario. We use current, as you can see by this chart, is the plan that was established in 2022, given the ARS model from that reserve study. That plan was to raise annual reserve contributions at 8% each year for 10 years, and then reduce it to 3% for inflation in 2033. A lot of things changed in the current reserve model. And as we looked at those changes given ARS's model, we've come up with a proposed scenario. We ran many different options. This is something that we felt comfortable with, and this is what we are proposing. Given the ARS model that they're presented, the board believes that reducing the annual increases from the prior 8% plan and over 2027 to 2029, using increases of 6%, 5%, and 4% respectively to 3% in 2030, achieve reserve levels that adequately cover the risks for Bishop's Forest. And I'll cover those in a minute. The last item is inflation, which Thor mentioned. And I won't go through that. So that is just a 3%. If we go from 8% to 3%, these are the resulting funding levels. So the current funding level, if Bishop Forest continues to raise annually reserve contributions by 8%, so this we ran, if we just did nothing to the way that we had planned in 2022, over a 30-year period of time, our percent funded level would be 113%. So it would be way, we would end up with $26 million in 2055, but we would be keeping lots of cash that is really unnecessary for the community. So we actually discarded this option. Thor went through the inflation rate option, which ended up at 37% or $9 million in reserves at the end of that period. The proposed level is raising annual contributions by 6% beginning in 2027, 5% to 4% in the years 2027 to 2029, then 3% onward, achieve a funding level of 51% or $12 million, which puts Bishop Forest in the midpoint between moderate to strong funding. So this compares to the 70% scenario that ARS presented. The board feels that given the risk profile of the community, which I'll be talking about, that reducing the annual reserve funds increases over 2027 to 2029 at the percentages that I just went through respectively, we will achieve adequate reserve funding for the community. So we think this is a big win for unit owners and will help reduce annual maintenance, increase pressure on the community in the upcoming years. So let's talk about risks. So here's a series of risks that we talked about. And I think I think it was in the chat, somebody says, will everything fail all at once? So here is our look at risks for Bishop's Forest in the next 10 years. So a siding cost overrun from Prime Touch estimates. Gen 1 siding replacements includes Thor built in at 3%. So he said we built in at 3%. In the numbers that we supplied, we built in a 10% contingency. So we effectively have like a 13% contingency for these estimates for the Gen 1 siding project. Prime Touch has been historically pretty good at their estimates. So we think that the risk profile is very low for this being an issue. Deck replacement needs earlier than modeled. We're planning on starting that project in 2032 and completing it by 2037. The risk of a wholesale failure of all decks all at one time is extremely low. And I will say that built into this model for ARS, we have assumed that in any given year, we will be replacing a handful of decks. So occasionally we find decks that repair is more expensive than replacing the deck, and we make those decisions as in the building committee, we talk about them, and if that's necessary, we will replace them. So we think that's a pretty low risk. Roofs need replacement earlier than modeled. we've only experienced spot roofing issues to date. And we think you have to think of this stuff, the risks are high, widespread failure, and we think it's low. The asphalt useful life is too long. So asphalt begins to fail sooner than expected. This year, we're doing Bishop's Forest Drive, and we are also doing Overlook. The next planned replacement for asphalt is in 2043. That includes 3 villages. So it's unlikely we would have 3 villages fail all at the same time. We may have one that could be an issue, which we could absorb that, but we think it's a pretty low risk profile there. Balcony replacement costs are too low. So one of the issues here is we don't have a model for the cost of replacing balconies, but we have included what we think is a reasonable estimate. We only have 64 balconies, and if the estimate is too low, I think the ability to absorb that is fairly easy, and we just consider that maybe a moderate estimate. And the last item is one item that we have discovered in work in Wayside is some chimney. When I say chimney failure, we found some rot in a couple of chimneys. We have taken care of it, but that's a risk. So we don't know some of the things that we're going to find. We think that's a moderate risk. So the bottom line is we think the likelihood of unforeseen issues of this magnitude don't create a problem for the reserved study funding. So this is a look at reserve funding over the next 10 years. So here are some highlights given the 654 funding that we are proposing. So this is our look at reserve funds given all of the things that we have planned to do over the next 10 years. Bishop's Forest will maintain a reserve fund, a cash balance in excess of $2.5 million, with a percent funded close to 30% for most of the 10 years. As we remove all of the Gen 1 siding, we repave Bishop's Forest Drive, and we replace all decks throughout Bishop's Forest. The percent funded dips in 2036 to 25% as the deck replacement project is a year away from completion. But beginning in 2037, Bishop's Forest, which is not shown here, begins a period of increasing reserve fund balances as siding replacement continues its hiatus. So over that next 3 years, we actually begin to accumulate fairly significant cash, which leads us to end the 30-year period at 51%. This is just a pictorial representation of just some of the major projects, most all of which we have talked about in the prior slides. But you can see we have the pool paver project, which is actually complete in Q2 of this year. Wayside is well underway, and we're at the point where there is power washing and painting has begun within Wayside. That will be completed over the next month or so. We don't have an exact start date for Bishop's Forest Drive and Overlook. So I have that slated as like a Q3 kind of project. And one of the things that we talked about it last year, is the bridge walkway. And that project will entail us putting in a new sidewalk as you cross the bridge, new railings, but we're also taking the time to look at the underside of the bridge. And although the bridge is structurally sound, there are some components under the bridge that we need to replace. So we're in the process of, it requires a structural engineer, and we're in the process of locating and working with a structural engineer. So we hope to complete that in the fourth quarter of this year. We will begin the Highlands siding painting decks in the first quarter or two next year. At the same time, I had mentioned walls and fences will be like this 3-year project, which we will be focusing on And hopefully we can accelerate some of that, but we may not necessarily be able to do that. We just think it's a period of extended replacement. We have a gap year in 2028, so we will be doing no work on, we don't plan to do work on any villages in 2028 simply because of the cycle that we have within the community, and we will begin our Morningside siding painting in the beginning of 2029. And with that, I will turn it over to Bob.
Thank you, Roy. Good evening, everybody. I am chair of the Building and Infrastructure Committee, which is the part of the board that takes a deep dive into all the issues involving building exteriors, our electrical systems that are part of the common area, and hardscape issues, all sorts of things. Pretty much everything outside of units that is not landscape. And we are fortunate to have on our committee Mr. Landon, who just made a brilliant presentation. And he's been on the committee for 4 years since he joined the board, as have I. And what's great about having Roy is, first of all, because he's the treasurer, we can balance in the committee the physical need, the physical need, I have to say this right, the physical needs of Bishop's Forest, which are many. We have to balance that with the fiscal resources, which are limited. And so when we assess problems, we do it with regard to that. And so when a recommendation from our committee goes to the board for approval to spend money, we've already taken into account the economic aspect, and we don't have to worry about the board sending it back and saying we can't afford it and redo it. It saves a lot of time for the board, it saves time for the committee, and it's very efficient. Also, Roy, in addition to his treasurer's talents, has a very astute and aesthetic eye, and he's a bit of a visionary. And as a result, he contributes greatly to our committee as well. So thank you, Roy, for your service, and I hope you'll stay on the committee for the next 2 years.
I will.
Other trustees come to the committee meetings, and we also have 2 volunteers from the community who are on the committee. Rich Wagner, a former board chair, and Hop Holmberg. And I have a word to say about Hop later. But before I do that, I also want to give a shout out to Alyssa, our fabulous property manager, whose presence at our meetings is indispensable because not only of her experience, her knowledge, and her excellent sense of judgment, but also because she has all the latest information about what's going on, complaints and requests from owners, issues with vendors. So her presence is essential and it's great. And finally, we invite vendors sometimes to come. We've met with an electrical vendor, and we frequently meet with Bill North, who is the president of Prime Touch. He comes to most of the meetings that we have involving Prime Touch. And that has been extremely constructive. It creates for very fluid communication. It avoids misunderstandings. It helps control costs. And it allows us to fine-tune projects when unexpected problems arise and we have to make some adjustments. It's been very, very fruitful. Bill says it's very helpful to him, and I think it's very helpful to us. Prime Touch has been doing work at Bishop's Forest for over 20 years, and that long-term relationship with a contractor is important, but it's important that we maintain it and that we keep it healthy. And I think our meetings with Bill does that. And the advantage of having a good relationship with the longtime contractor is that they can help us when we're in a pinch. And that happened this winter with the ice dams. It was a terrible problem, and we were, everybody was having this problem. And Prime Touch came here very quickly and started working on it. They removed snow and ice from roofs, which is not really their job is supposed to be, but they did it. They put a crew on it. They were dealing with damage. And if they hadn't been here and been here quickly, we would have been in big trouble because everybody was looking for someone to do this kind of work, and we wouldn't have been able to just pick up the phone and call another contractor. This is the advantage of having a healthy, long-term relationship with a vendor who does a lot of work here. We're a big client. They appreciate that. But here's a situation where we benefited from that relationship. And I'm glad that we're able to keep that going through our meetings with Bill on a regular basis. Now, I mentioned Hop Holberg. Hop noticed that there were some units where the numbers for the units were not really, they didn't really indicate where the door was to the unit. And he knew that there were some issues with deliveries going to the wrong place. And of course, that made us concerned that emergency responders might go to the wrong place too, which could be very bad. So Hop undertook to review all of the numbers of all the units in Bishop's Forest and put together a list of the ones where he thought there was a problem, and he recommended how to move the numbers to solve the problem. He presented that to our committee after spending quite a bit of time on it, and we assessed it and we approved it, and the numbers in those cases were moved. It's a great example of a volunteer from the community doing something major like that, but it's a single kind of undertaking. It doesn't require being on the board to do something like that. And it was very helpful, and we're deeply appreciative. Hop also is a very active part of the committee, comes to all the meetings, and his input on many issues is greatly valued. So if other people want to get involved as volunteers on this committee or other committees or in other ways, I urge you to contact the board because we can always use a little more help. Now, Roy, and before that, Thor went through the accomplishments of the last year and the planned things that we're doing in the coming year. You can see it on my PowerPoint slide. I'm not going to go through them all. That would just be redundant. So I'm just going to say it's been an honor to serve on the board for the last 4 years, and I look forward to serving the community for 2 more years. And I thank you for your support. And I turn it over to Joe, I think.
Hi, my name's Joe Stewart. I'm chair of the Landscaping Committee. We've worked on the annual tree pruning. The rejuvenation project continues on. The replacement of trees and bushes, Alyssa and I walked the property on Monday, taking a look at areas that bushes had to be pulled and replacements could be put in place. The rhododendrons, some are coming back very well. The spring planting update, the plantings have been pretty much completed. I think there are some perennials left to go in, and those should be delivered shortly. Alyssa's been in touch with Oxbow about continuing the treatment for the invasive plants, poison ivy, bittersweet around the complex. The new landscaping contractor, Viking, has been on site since April. They're doing a great job. They started late because ND had not completed the things they had said they were going to complete. Viking started up the irrigation system, replaced some heads, and they installed all the spring plantings. And I think Waverly was around today spraying for ornamental trees. And the last thing, I'd like to thank all the members of the Landscape Committee. They've done a great job. They picked out all the flowers. They also met with a Zoom meeting with the head of Viking, Jeremy. And I think I'm very happy that I'm very honored to be working with these members of the committee. And that's it. Joan, back to you.
Thanks, Joe. And I have the pleasure of also feeling honored to serve on the board. This will be my third term, and as you can tell, we've been busy and we work together well, and it's truly a pleasure to work with such dedicated board members. I also want to thank all of the committee chairs and the members of the committees, the village reps, which has been a position that has existed in the community for years. And we need to re-examine how we can reinvigorate that role and engage them more in the community. I want to thank the social committee and all of its members for putting on such great get-togethers for the community throughout the summer season. We also are very lucky to have individuals who serve as book club coordinators, needle and crafts group coordinators, a neighbor driving neighbors to the airport, which is a purely volunteer program. The Juliets are coordinated by a member of the community, and all of the people who work to coordinate the pickleball. It truly takes a village to make a space that everybody can live and enjoy the community, and we want to thank you. I also want to extend a very special thank you to Bonnie Riegelman, who is stepping off the board with tonight's meeting. She and her husband Lou, who many of you may not know, were both board members multiple times at various times that they've lived in the community, probably since its inception. Bonnie has been very active in the newsletter that existed for many years. She was the editor-in-chief. And Bonnie has coordinated pickleball and book clubs, and wherever there was a need, we could ask Bonnie for her help and support. So as she steps off the board wants to acknowledge her and thank her for everything that she has done for the community. And now we'll accept questions from Roy's presentation and Bob and Joe's.
And again, it can be done in the chat to the host or virtually raising a hand. I did get a question in the chat. I had already answered it, but I want to read it out loud anyways. Says, Roy mentioned all siding will end up being the new version. My understanding and what I have seen to date, not all siding is being replaced. So how will we reach 100% new siding? And to quickly answer that, so we are replacing from first generation to second generation. So a lot of siding had already been replaced over to second generation in previous rounds. The goal moving forward is to continue replacing all of the first generation that is left. So after these future rounds, we will be at 100% second generation siding.
Steve has his hand up.
Okay.
Steve Lewis,
Steve Lewis, okay. Thank you.
you're muted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Alyssa just allowed me to. No, thanks so much. This was really greatly appreciated, all the presentations. I just have one comment and one question. And Roy in particular, I just really appreciate all the detail you and others have put into the financial presentation. So I know right now we're at about 25% fully funded, and the Thor from ARS said it's strong at 70%, and the proposal is to get to about 51% over time, and through starting next year, 6% increase in 5 and 4 and then 3 after that. That seems very reasonable to me. And maybe this was included in your presentation, Roy, but when it's presented to the to the community, is if there's some type of executive, there's a lot of good detail. But if there's an executive summary that can say, that 70% is strong, we're at 25, we're trying to get to 51, here's the rationale for it in a way that, can be clear and concise, I think that would be really helpful. So that's just a thought, but I think it's very well thought out. And then the only question is more on that I think either Roy, you or somebody mentioned about the snow assessment. I understand why it's needed. Did you or someone say that it's going to be communicated that there's a need for a snow assessment August 1st and then it's due August 31?
Yes. So there's a letter that should be going out over the next couple of days, just alerting the community that the assessment was voted on. And what we're not doing, we could have billed it on July 1st, and we decided that we would just defer billing until August 1st, and it's due by the end of the month. So just to give people a little time, since it's not necessarily planned for. And we thought that seemed reasonable.
So in the next few days, there'll be some type of communication that there will be an assessment in August.
Yes.
Okay. And I know I don't know if it varies by unit, but what is the approximate average assessment going to be? And is that going to be communicated in the next few days to people?
Yes. So included in the letter should be, so everybody has a different percent within the community. There should be included a table which will show, based on your unit, how much the assessment would be. And it ranged, I think off the top of my head, it was somewhere between $450 and $750, depending on the size unit that you occupy.
And this will be in a physical letter in the next few days to the community?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
super. Thanks so much. That's great. Thanks for everything, everyone. Really. Thank you.
The letter will be mailed and emailed, so you should be receiving both forms.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good.
I think I saw a hand from Ken Goldman.
Yeah.
Did you have your hand up?
It's virtually raised. Can you find it, Melissa?
I
It's
don't
hard
see
to
it.
see on the.
Yeah, the only one I
It's
see
on
is-
the corner.
Oh, I see it. Sorry. I was looking. Yeah.
So Ken, it's on the corner of your cabinet, so it's hard to see.
Yeah, he's unmuted.
Yeah, I'm unmuted, but I'm not on video. That's okay. Oh, there I am.
Yes, you are.
Yes, you are. We see you.
Okay, so I have a clarification and a question. The snow removal excess,
Yes.
which clearly couldn't be budgeted for or anticipated, is that kind of excess is not within the application of the reserve funds. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
So it's an operational expense as opposed to, a reserve fund expense is something that you invest in and it lasts more than 1 year. So it's just operational.
Yes, I understand that. That seems clear. And unfortunately, I suppose there's not a whole lot that we can do about that in projecting the unforeseen weather. So the second question I have, which is more relevant to the reserve funds, is the I'll call it worst case scenarios. What kind of catastrophic event or events could occur such that the fact that we're in the low to medium levels of reserve could occur that could cause extreme trouble? I'll put it that way.
You know what? We talked about that. I think, as Bob said, if we had a fire, a lot of that is covered with insurance. So we have insurance coverage for something like that. It would have to be something that wasn't covered by insurance. I don't know if earthquakes are covered by insurance. I don't know what it could be, but we did, we tried to come up with different scenarios that would really create a huge problem for us. And we couldn't come up with anything that we wouldn't be able to absorb. So you need to make sure you have enough cash on hand, right? So if something happens, we want to know we have coffers to be able to deal with that. If we do, we can deal with it, and then we may have to reassess what we're going to do. But that's really the scenario that you want to prevent, where we don't suddenly say, holy crap. We have to go out to the community because we don't have the funds. Take the $2.5 million, and we need another, $2.5 million. We couldn't come up with a scenario where that would occur.
Yeah. Ken, I would say that it would have to be a disaster of some sort,
Yeah.
as I just mentioned. But also, I mean, it's easy to say that you're insured for a lot of these events, but sometimes, especially if it's a major disaster and it's area wide, there's a gap in timing between when you need to do something and when you're going to get an insurance payment. And so, even though it seems like really, really unlikely, we think it's prudent to be in a position where people here aren't suffering just because of weird timing events or weather events or whatever. So it's good to have some money in the bank that you think is adequate or more than adequate to deal with stuff that you just can't foresee but could happen. And I don't think it needs to be excessive, but it's prudent to have some around.
Can you unmute Ken again?
Oh,
Alyssa?
sure. Sorry, I didn't realize he got muted.
That's okay. It's the wonders of technology. Okay, I got it. The challenge, I suppose, is there any methodology to put aside extra operating funds for substantial expenses that are not within the budget?
So which is a good question. We have excess funds. So we have roughly 3 months of monthly operating expenses. So there's a 3-month burn rate. So we do have extra funds. So here's a good example of what Mark was talking about. We had enough funds to pay all the bills associated with the snow. And we don't need you guys to pay or members to pay until September. So, I mean, that's a good example of having funds to be able to deal with something, but they need to be replenished. And there's a rule of thumb is 2 to 3 to 4 months of monthly operating expense is what you should have on hand. One of the things that we are doing is over the last few years, we have been trying to use up excess funds to reduce the annual maintenance increase. So we are finding ways of using the extra cash, but the question is how much is enough? And although we could have absorbed the 150, we thought it was prudent not to, and it gives us more flexibility in terms of managing the community.
Yeah, I actually have no problem with it. I was just curious as to how it's planned for, and I think that the work that you guys have presented tonight is appropriate and impressive. If you'll allow me, I'm going to pass it over to my wife, Anita, for just a moment. She had a bit of a question.
I just wanted to clarify, was your proposal to not ultimately fund to 100%, but to 50% or 51% of the
Yes. Yes.
And please repeat what the rationale was for that, as opposed to going to 75 or 100%?
All of those are options for any community. An option for this community could be that we think 25% is sufficient. And I've worked on many different communities where many members felt we really don't need to have a lot in the reserve fund. So I think all of us struggle with how much is enough, how much money is enough to have in the coffers. And I think going through the risk analysis for us gave us far more comfort that do we really need 70%? Do you really need 100%? And I think there's no correct answer to this. It's more a question of if you look at the details and you understand what the risks are, you try to come up with maybe a midpoint to that. So is 51% correct? Well, we think it's a reasonable place to be given the risk profile of the community. Other communities may have much different risks than our community. And I think I spent a little time talking about where we are. We have done an amazing amount of work over the last 4 years to bring this community to the point where a lot of the work that we need to do will last us 25 to 35 years. So my feeling, and I'll just speak personally, my feeling was I think 70%, would be great. It would be great to be sitting around with all that cash, but is it really necessary? And that's a debate everybody has within communities. You know, how much do I really want to have invested in my community? And what's reasonable for unit owners to invest? So,
yeah, I think that's really well said, Roy. I mean, Anita, you can think about over the last 4, 5, 6 years, we've actually been de-risking the community in a sense by making all the investments we have, replacing siding, fixing the roads, doing the roof. You're taking away the risk of those have failed, and you're pushing it way out into the future. And so the chance that, you know, you reach some sort of ruin becomes vanishingly small. And if that's true, how much do you really need? Like what is excessive? In the presentation, he talked about, you want to be fully funded at $10 million. No. Well, okay, but we only spend $1 million a year. So do you want to have 10 years of the future sitting in the bank, even, and then still contributing your $1 million every year? It feels like a lot. And almost no communities do that. So.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay,
I think
thank you. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you. Stanley K. or
Yes.
Joanne K.
Yeah.
Should be unmuted.
Are we muted?
No, you're
No.
unmuted.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Based on what she said, and I thank you because I know from personal experience in this household what being on the board means. You've all done a wonderful job. What has been, say, over the last 10 years? Has it been at the 25 to 30% to 50? You know, it seems that it's worked at that rate. That would be one question. And the second is, I think there really needs to be some serious thought about what in the world are we going to do about the front of the units, the landscaping, because clearly the model with the grass being torn up every year, what ND did to, quote, repair, reduces the value of our units. It looks terrible. And whether it's ground cover or putting, you know, some sort of, I don't know, what's edging, you know, or something so that the snowplows don't keep digging up. So I think whether it's landscaping or someone needs, and maybe it's not the same in every village, depending on whatever. Thank you.
So Joanne, I'll just answer the first part of that, which is one of my slides showed us at the start of 2023, we had a negative $50,000 in the reserve fund. So clearly, however it was being funded over the prior years was not sufficient. And
but have we ever even aimed for 100%?
No.
No.
You know what?
I think your analysis is correct that it doesn't make sense.
Right. Joanne, if you went out and polled communities throughout the entire US, I don't know if you could find one community that's at 100%. I think the reserve study people always present that because, you know, in the ideal world, that's would be a great place to be. Realistically, holding people's money at that level seems excessive. And as as I mentioned, that's the way the board felt, and we think our risk profile just doesn't require that.
As for the
I'll leave-
landscaping,
yeah.
we recognize that we have a serious issue. And we're looking at alternatives and seeking assistance from our new landscaping vendor, who has already presented some thoughts. So the board understands, shares the concern, and we want to do something about it.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I don't have anything in chat. I mean, I have a couple thank yous in chat, just thanking the board and Bonnie for all of their work. Another many thanks to the board and all volunteers. But I do not have any other questions at the moment.
Okay.
Alyssa, do you want to present?
Sure. So the election results. So as Joan mentioned earlier, we met quorum for the meeting at 59.5%, which equals 160 voters. That is a great turnout. Thank you to all those who participated in the vote. And because we met quorum, all 4 candidates are voted onto the board. There's 3 incumbents, Roy Landon, Bob Farrell, and Joan Ruver. And we'd like to warmly welcome Hillary Kent as a new member of the board. And thank you all for your willingness to run and rerun for the board.
Great.
Thank you. There being no other business, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second?
And
All in
everybody
favor?
should stay on, including Hillary.
But Bonnie,
Yeah,
Bonnie,
All the board members.
Bonnie doesn't have to. Bonnie,
Yes.
this is Bonnie's first freedom.